I didn't cry when I found out. I didn't scream, didn't call anyone, didn't even close the browser tab. I just sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold and read the same 3 lines on my screen over and over again until they stopped feeling like words and started feeling like a diagnosis. A hard inquiry. From a mortgage lender I had never heard of, on a property I had never seen. My name, my social security number, my credit. I was 31 years old, a registered nurse, working night shifts at a level 2 trauma center, and someone had just tried to buy a house with my identity. I already knew who it was before I made a single phone call. My sister-in-law had been circling my finances for 2 years. I just hadn't realized she'd already landed. My brother Marcus and I were close growing up, 2 years apart, same sense of humor, same stubbornness about admitting when we were wrong. When our mother passed from ovarian cancer 5 years ago, it pulled us closer for about 6 months, and then, slowly, it didn't. That was around the time he started dating Renee. Renee was the kind of person who entered a room and immediately began calculating what she could get out of it. I noticed it the first Thanksgiving she attended. She spent 40 minutes asking my aunt about the house she owned outright in Scottsdale. And when my aunt mentioned she had no children, Renee physically leaned forward. I watched it happen. Marcus was laughing at something across the room and didn't see any of it. I want to be fair here, because I've spent a lot of time trying to be fair. Renee wasn't loud about it. She never made scenes. She was strategic in the way that people are when they've had a lot of practice. She complimented your shoes right before she asked you a favor. She remembered birthdays with the precision of someone who kept a spreadsheet, and maybe she did. When she and Marcus got engaged, I was genuinely happy for him. I stood up in their wedding. I gave a speech. I meant most of it. It was about 8 months after the wedding that she started making comments about money. Small ones at first. Marcus mentioned you just got your merit raise. That must feel good. And then at a family dinner, quieter. You know, with what nurses make these days, have you thought about investing in property? Real estate is really the way families build wealth together. Together. That word again. I let it go. People make comments. I was busy. Night shifts don't leave you with a lot of energy for reading subtext. Then my mother's estate finished processing. Our mother had not been wealthy. She had been careful. For 30 years, she had put money aside in a way that people from her generation understood, quietly, without fanfare, without telling anyone the exact number. When she died, Marcus and I each received just under $90,000. It wasn't life-changing money. It was more like the kind of money that could change one specific thing, if you were deliberate about it. I was deliberate. I put $70,000 into a high-yield account I had opened specifically for a down payment on a condo I'd been saving toward for 3 years. The remaining $20,000 stayed liquid. I didn't tell anyone the breakdown. I told Marcus I'd receive my share. We had a quiet dinner to acknowledge it, and that was that. Renee, however, had questions. Do you have a financial advisor? She asked me 6 weeks later over brunch. Because Marcus and I are working with someone really great, it might make sense for you to consolidate, keep everything in one place, especially for tax purposes. I said I was fine. It's just that individual accounts can be so inefficient, she said, stirring her mimosa. Family assets tend to grow better when they're managed collectively. Family assets. I remember setting down my fork. I remember looking at her and thinking, that is not a casual phrase. That is a position statement. I said nothing. I smiled and changed the subject and drove home thinking about that word, collective, and how it applied to money that had come to me from my mother's hands and no one else's. I should tell you about the form. 3 months before the credit inquiry appeared on my account, Renee had called me asking for a favor. Marcus was traveling for work. He's in logistics, gone 2 or 3 weeks at a stretch, and she was trying to refinance a small personal loan. Something about needing a co-signer for a better rate, just temporarily, she said, just to get the paperwork through. She'd remove me in 6 months. It would never affect my credit. I said no. I said it nicely, but I said it clearly. I told her I made a personal rule not to co-sign anything, not for anyone, and that this wasn't about trust. It was just a boundary I kept. She said she completely understood. That was November. In February, the hard inquiry appeared. I want you to understand what a hard inquiry means specifically. It means someone applied for credit using your information. It means they submitted documents. It means there is a paper trail, a digital trail, an everything trail, because lenders don't process mortgage applications informally. There are forms, there are signatures, there are IP addresses attached to every document uploaded to every portal. I knew this because one of my closest friends from nursing school had gone through identity theft 2 years prior and had explained every step of the process to me in exhausting detail during a very long car ride to a bachelorette weekend. I had listened, half paying attention, the way you listen to information you don't think you'll ever need. I needed it now. I did not call Marcus. I want to be clear about that choice. I made it deliberately, and I would make it again. Marcus loved Renee. Marcus was also in the specific way of people who love someone who is not quite honest, very good at finding alternative explanations for things. I had watched him do it in small ways for 2 years. I was not going to hand him the opportunity to do it with this. Instead, I called the lender. The customer service representative was polite and then increasingly less polite when I explained that I had not authorized any application and had not submitted any documents and had never heard of the property in question. She transferred me to the fraud department. The fraud department was more serious. They asked me to verify my identity, which I did. They asked if I had ever shared my social security number with anyone voluntarily, and I said not recently, no. They asked if I had signed any documents in the past 6 months. I paused. What kind of documents, I asked. They described a gift letter, specifically a gift letter indicating that I had gifted $45,000 to Marcus and Renee as a down payment contribution, and that this money was not a loan and would not be repaid, and that I was doing so freely and without expectation of return. $45,000 from my mother's inheritance money that I had never given anyone. There was a signature on the form. My name in handwriting that was close but not quite right. The kind of forgery that works when no one is looking carefully and fails completely when they are. I thanked the fraud department representative. I told her I would be filing a report. I wrote down every name, every reference number, every timestamp she gave me. Then I hung up and I sat very quietly for a long time. Here's what I understood in that silence. Renee had not done this impulsively. She had my social security number, which meant she had accessed something, a document, a form, something from when Marcus and I had handled our mother's estate jointly and certain paperwork had passed between us. She had constructed a gift letter. She had forged my signature. She had submitted it as part of a mortgage application for a property that she and Marcus were apparently in the process of purchasing. Marcus, who was traveling. Marcus, who may or may not have known exactly what documents his wife was submitting in his name. I did not let myself answer that question yet. I needed information before emotion. I took 2 days off work, which for a night shift nurse is not nothing. I used that time carefully. I filed a police report for identity theft and forgery. The officer who took my statement was thorough and asked good questions and told me to preserve everything. I already was. I contacted the Federal Trade Commission and filed a report there as well, because wire fraud involving mortgage applications carries federal implications that a local report alone doesn't cover. I knew this because I had looked it up and looked it up again and looked it up a third time to make sure I was not overreacting. I was not overreacting. I called my bank and placed a fraud alert on my accounts. I pulled all 3 of my credit reports and combed through them the way I read patient charts, looking for anything that shouldn't be there, anything out of sequence, anything that indicated this had happened more than once. It hadn't. This was the only application. But it had been submitted twice, once rejected, once pending, and the second submission had included the forged gift letter with my signature. The lender's portal, and this is the part that made my hands go very still when I read it. The lender's portal logged IP addresses for every document upload. The gift letter had been uploaded from a residential IP address registered to a street in Chandler, Arizona. I knew that address. I had been to that address for Easter dinner. It was Renee and Marcus's house. I sat with that information for a long time. Not because I was surprised, because I was deciding what to do with the fact that I wasn't. I called a real estate attorney. I will not tell you her name because she's a private person and I haven't asked her permission, but I will tell you that she had 22 years of experience and the kind of calm, specific voice that made me feel like the world was governed by rules that could be enforced. She walked me through what I had. She told me the forged gift letter was, conservatively, 3 separate crimes: forgery, identity theft, and mortgage fraud. If the application had gone through and a loan had been issued, add wire fraud. Federal charges, not a fine and probation situation. A you may lose your real estate license and serve time situation. What do you want the outcome to be? She asked me. I thought about it. I thought about Marcus. I thought about my mother, who had worked 2 part-time jobs in her 50s to save that money, who had eaten lunches from home and driven a car for 11 years past when she should have replaced it, who had told me once that she wanted us to have something solid, something that was ours. I want the property transaction stopped, I said, and I want her to answer for what she did. Then here's what we're going to do, she said. The closing was scheduled for a Friday morning. I found out the date from a detail Renee had mentioned casually at a family dinner she'd invited me to 3 weeks prior. A dinner I now understood was either a test or a performance, and possibly both. She had mentioned the address of the new place, mentioned it almost in passing, mentioned they were so close to the finish line. She had looked at me when she said it. I had smiled and asked what the square footage was. I didn't tell Marcus. I want to say this again, because I know it's the part people will argue about. I didn't warn him. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about what it would mean to call him and say, your wife forged my name on a federal mortgage document and used our dead mother's money as fictional collateral. I thought about what he would say. I thought about the 48 hours of phone calls, of Renee's explanations, of Marcus slowly talking himself into a version of events that protected his marriage and left me standing alone next to the truth. I decided I would rather he learn it the same way I did, from facts, in sequence, with no room to negotiate around them. The night before the closing, I sent a certified letter to the title company, informing them that a document in their file bore my forged signature and that I had filed reports with local law enforcement and the FTC, and that I was formally objecting to the use of any document purporting to represent my consent or financial contribution. I attached the police report number. I attached the FTC reference number. I attached a notarized statement from myself and a letter from my attorney. I also made a phone call to the mortgage lender's fraud department, the same department I had spoken to weeks earlier, and I informed them that I would be present at the closing the following morning, as was my legal right as a party whose identity had been used in the application. They told me to come. I dressed professionally. Not formally, not like I was trying to intimidate anyone, just professionally, the way I dress when I know I'm going to be taken seriously or I'm going to make sure I am. I brought a folder. I arrived 15 minutes early. The closing was in a title company office that smelled like printer toner and artificial lemon, the specific smell of paperwork and consequence. There was a conference table. There was a representative from the title company, a loan officer from the lender, and a notary. Renee and Marcus arrived 4 minutes later. I will tell you what Renee's face did when she saw me, because I want you to understand that a face can tell you everything you needed to know about a situation that you spent months second-guessing. Her expression went through 4 distinct phases in approximately 2 seconds: surprise, calculation, recovery, and then a smile so quick and so practiced that if I had blinked, I would have missed everything before it. Marcus looked confused. He looked at me and then at Renee and then at the room and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" "I was invited," I said, and I looked at the loan officer when I said it. The loan officer nodded once, very slightly. He had a copy of my letter in front of him. Renee said smoothly that there must be some kind of mix-up, that I hadn't been part of this process, that she didn't understand why I was here. She said it the way she said everything, pleasantly, with the texture of someone who has never done anything wrong and is simply confused by the chaos around her. I opened my folder. I don't believe in making speeches in moments like this. I believe in documents. I laid them on the table in order. The fraud report, the FTC filing, the IP address log from the lender's portal, the one showing that the gift letter had been uploaded from her home address, the notarized affidavit, and finally a printed copy of the gift letter itself, with my signature, the signature I had never written. "I'd like someone to explain this to me," I said. I kept my voice level. I had practiced keeping my voice level. Renee looked at the documents. She looked at them the way someone looks at something they were certain would never exist. Marcus looked at the documents. Then he looked at Renee. He didn't say anything. I watched his face do something complicated and then go very still. The loan officer said quietly that under the circumstances they would need to pause the closing, that this had been flagged, that there were concerns about document authenticity, that they had a legal obligation to pause. Renee said there was an explanation. She said the gift letter had been prepared in advance and that there had been a communication breakdown with me and that we had spoken about this. "We hadn't," I said. "You mentioned—" "We hadn't," I said again. Same volume, same tone. The notary had stopped arranging her papers. The title company representative was looking at the loan officer. Marcus was looking at the table. Then the loan officer said something I had been told to listen for. He said that as part of the pause, he would need Renee to complete a supplemental affidavit confirming the authenticity of all documents she had submitted. Standard procedure, he said, when a fraud flag was raised. He slid a form across the table. Renee looked at the form. I watched her look at it. I had been told by my attorney that signing a false affidavit at this stage would add perjury to the existing charges. I had been told not to say this out loud. I didn't. Renee picked up the pen, and this is the part I will remember for the rest of my life. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with a specific clarity. She signed it. She signed the form attesting that all submitted documents were authentic and submitted with full consent of all named parties. The loan officer collected the form. He thanked everyone for their time. He said the closing would not be proceeding today and that they would be in contact with the relevant parties going forward. He said this in the tone of someone who has made this kind of call before. 2 days later, Renee was contacted by law enforcement. She was charged with forgery, identity theft, and mortgage fraud because the application had crossed state lines. The property was in a different county, the lender's processing center in a different state. Federal wire fraud charges were added. The signed affidavit at the closing became a perjury charge. Her attorney worked quickly and she took a plea to avoid trial, but the plea still involved a felony on her record, 2 years of probation, full restitution, and the permanent note in federal records that tends to follow people who commit mortgage fraud. The property purchase collapsed. Marcus called me the night after the closing. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 3 days later, and I answered. The conversation was long and difficult, and I'm not going to summarize it here because some parts of what happened between us are not anyone else's to hear. What I will say is that Marcus had not known about the gift letter specifically. What he had known, and what he admitted in that phone call, was that Renee had told him my contribution was arranged, and he had not asked what that meant. He had not asked, and he had signed loan documents that referenced an attached gift letter he had not read. I don't know what to do with that. I'm still deciding what to do with that. What I know is that my mother saved for 30 years. She drove that same car and packed those same lunches because she believed that the right kind of careful, sustained work produces something real. Something that belongs to the person who earned it. Not to whoever is clever enough to take it. The $45,000 is still in my account. The condo I had been saving for, I made an offer on it 6 weeks after the closing. I got it. I have a small balcony that faces east, and I drink my coffee there in the mornings. After night shifts, when the sky is doing that specific thing it does at 6 a.m. in the desert, going from dark purple to pale gold, in the time it takes to finish one cup. I don't think about Renee very often. When I do, I don't feel angry. I feel something quieter than that. Closure isn't forgiveness, and it isn't forgetting. It's the moment you realize that someone tried to take something from you and failed, and that failure is now permanent. It's a door that locks from your side. I paid for that lock with 3 weeks of documentation and one very early Friday morning, and I would do it again without changing a single step. My mother would have understood that completely.